When I married Chief Emeka, I thought my life would finally be perfect. He was wealthy, respected, and provided me with everything I could ever need. But something was missing. Love. I convinced myself that love wasn't important, that security was what mattered most. But everything changed the day I met his son, Damian. Damian was nothing like his father. While Chief Emeka was in his late 50s, calm and calculative, Damian was young, vibrant, and full of life. He had just returned from studying abroad, and the moment he stepped into the house, I felt the air shift. He was tall, with sharp features, and eyes that held the secrets I couldn't understand. From the moment our eyes met, I knew I was in trouble. At first, Damian barely acknowledged me. He was cold and distant, always lost in his own world. I assumed he hated me for marrying his father, for taking a place in their home that wasn't mine to take. I tried to avoid him, to pretend he didn't affect me. But it was impossible. Every time he walked into a room, my heart raced. I told myself it was fear. Fear of what he thought of me. Fear of ruining my marriage. But deep down, I knew it was something else. One evening, Chief Emeka had to travel for business, leaving Damian and me alone in the house. The air between us was thick with unspoken words as we sat at opposite ends of the dining table. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me, but I refused to meet his gaze. "You don't have to act like I don't exist," Damian finally said, his voice smooth and deep. I looked up, surprised. It was the first time he had spoken directly to me since he arrived. I don't know what you mean," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. "You're afraid of me." I swallowed hard. "I'm not." His eyes darkened as he tilted his head. "Then why do you avoid me?" I had no answer. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I was afraid of how he made me feel, of the way my body reacted when he was near. So instead I stood up, gathering my plate. "It's late. Good night." As I walked away, I could feel his eyes following me, burning into my skin. My hands trembled as I washed the dishes, my mind racing with thoughts I had no right to think. I was a married woman. Damian was my stepson. Whatever I was feeling was wrong. I went to my bedroom and locked the door behind me, pressing my back against it as I exhaled deeply. My heart pounded in my chest. I needed to get a grip. Maybe it was just my imagination, just loneliness playing tricks on me. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew it was a lie. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. Was I really afraid of Damian? Or was I afraid of what I wanted from him? I didn't know it yet. But that night was the beginning of something I would never be able to undo. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling tension. Damian and I barely spoke, yet I could feel his presence everywhere. Every glance, every accidental touch, every moment we shared in the same space felt charged, like a spark waiting to ignite a flame. One afternoon, I was in the garden tending to the flowers when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Damian standing there watching me. My breath caught in my throat. "You like roses?" he observed, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, brushing my fingers over the delicate petals. "They remind me of home." He stepped closer. "Where is home?" I hesitated. Home? What was home to me now? A place? A feeling? I had left my old life behind when I married his father, but I wasn't sure I had truly found home here. "Far away," I finally said, forcing a smile. Damian studied me for a moment, his gaze intense. "You're not happy, are you?" His question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned away, pretending to focus on the flowers. "Why do you care?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Because I see you." I felt my heart skip a beat. His words held a depth that frightened me. I had spent so long pretending, wearing a mask of contentment, but Damian saw through it, and that realization was more dangerous than anything else. Before I could respond, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was brief, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world around us disappeared. It was just us, standing too close, feeling too much. A loud noise from inside the house broke the moment. I stepped back, my pulse racing. "I should go," I whispered, turning to leave. As I walked away, I could feel his gaze on me, just like that first night. But this time, it wasn't just curiosity. It was something more. That evening, I tried to focus on a book, but my mind kept drifting. The way Damian had looked at me, the way his touch had sent waves of heat through my body. It was dangerous. I had to put a stop to it before it was too late. I decided to keep my distance, to avoid being alone with him. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Chief Emeka called, informing me that his trip had been extended. Damian and I would be alone in the house for another week. My heart pounded at the realization. A week alone with him. A week of fighting the forbidden attraction growing between us. And deep down, I feared that I wouldn't be able to resist it. The silence in the house felt deafening without Chief Emeka. I told myself to stay busy, to act normal. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, my thoughts always drifted back to Damian. That evening, I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and found Damian leaning against the doorframe, watching me. "You cook?" he asked, amusement in his voice. I smiled nervously. "Of course. Why wouldn't I? I just never imagined you as the type." I rolled my eyes. "What type did you imagine me to be?" He took a step forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "The type who has everything done for her. The type who belongs in a glass house." I turned back to the pot on the stove, stirring absently. "You don't know me, Damian." "No," he murmured, "but I'd like to." His voice was so close that I felt the heat of his breath near my neck. My hand trembled as I reached for the spice rack. Before I could grab what I needed, Damian's hand brushed against mine. The touch was brief, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I inhaled sharply and stepped back, clutching the counter for support. "I think you should go." He didn't move. Instead, he studied me, his expression unreadable. "Why do you keep running from me?" I looked away. "I'm not running." "Yes, you are," he said softly. "You're scared." My chest tightened. He was right, but I couldn't admit it. How could I? This, whatever this was dangerous. Before I could respond, the power went out, plunging the kitchen into darkness. I gasped. "Damian, I'm here," he whispered. The room was silent except for the distant sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. My heart pounded as I felt him move closer. I should have stepped away, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, trapped by emotions I had no right to feel. "Do you want me to leave?" Damian's voice was barely audible, yet it carried so much weight. I swallowed hard. "Yes." A heavy silence followed. And then, he exhaled. "Liar." I flinched as his fingers brushed against my arm, his touch barely there. My body betrayed me, leaning into the warmth of his presence. I hated myself for it. Before I could gather my thoughts, the power returned, flooding the kitchen with light. I stepped back as reality crashed down on me. Damian was watching me intently, his eyes filled with something I wasn't ready to face. I turned quickly, grabbing a cloth to wipe my hands. "I should finish dinner." He didn't argue. He simply gave me a knowing look before walking away. But as I stood there, my hands trembling, I knew that something had changed, and there was no going back. I avoided Damian for the next few days, but it was useless. The more I tried to keep my distance, the more fate seemed determined to push us together. Each moment of silence between us spoke louder than words. Each glance felt like a touch, and each breath we shared in the same space burned with tension. One evening, after an unbearable day of pretending, I decided to take a swim. The water was my escape, my only solace in a world that felt like it was spinning out of control. As I glided through the pool, I let my thoughts drift, hoping the cool water would wash away the heat that burned inside me. But then I heard footsteps. I turned, and there he was, Damian, standing at the edge of the pool, watching me. My heart slammed against my ribs. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice deep and unreadable. I swallowed. I needed to clear my head. He crouched down, resting his elbows on his knees. And did it work? I met his gaze, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. No. The silence between us was thick with unspoken desires. I knew I should get out of the pool, wrap a towel around myself and walk away. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, treading water, waiting for something I knew was inevitable. Damian exhaled sharply, then stood and began unbuttoning his shirt. My eyes widened as he pulled it off, revealing his toned chest. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Swimming," he replied simply before diving in. The water rippled as he surfaced close to me, too close. The air between us crackled with tension. I could feel the warmth of his body despite the coolness of the water. "This is wrong," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Then tell me to go," he challenged, his eyes locked onto mine. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My breath hitched as his hand brushed against my arm, his touch igniting a fire inside me. Every part of me screamed to stop this, to swim away, but I couldn't move. "Say it," Damian murmured, his lips inches from mine. I closed my eyes, willing myself to push him away. But when I opened them, I knew the truth. I didn't want him to stop. And then it happened. His lips met mine, soft, yet demanding. A shockwave ran through my body, and I melted into him, surrendering to a desire I had fought so hard to deny. I didn't know what this meant, or what would happen next. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. The moment our lips parted, reality came crashing down. My chest rose and fell rapidly as I stared at Damian, my mind struggling to process what we had just done. My heart pounded, not just from desire, but from fear. Fear of what this meant. Fear of what would happen if anyone found out. I pushed away from him, my breath shaky. "We shouldn't have done that." Damian ran a hand through his wet hair, his dark eyes unreadable. "I know," he admitted, his voice rough. "But you can't deny that you wanted it too." I turned away, wrapping my arms around myself. I had fought this attraction for so long, but in that moment, I had lost control. And now, I had to deal with the consequences. "This is wrong, Damian. Your father, my father doesn't love you." He cut in, his tone laced with frustration. "He married you because you look good on his arm, because you're young and beautiful. But does he even see you? Does he know what makes you happy?" Tears burned my eyes. I hated that he was right. I had been nothing more than a trophy wife, an accessory to Chief Emeka's life. But that didn't justify what had just happened. "It doesn't matter," I whispered, I made a vow, and I can't betray him. Damian exhaled, stepping closer. So, you're just going to pretend this never happened? I swallowed hard. Yes. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. Fine, if that's what you want. But the way he said it, the look in his eyes, I knew this wasn't over. I spent the next few days avoiding Damian, throwing myself into anything that would keep me busy. I barely slept, barely ate. My thoughts were consumed with guilt, regret, and worst of all, longing. Chief Emeka finally returned home, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, asked about the house, then spent the rest of the evening on the phone discussing business deals. It was as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. Damian, on the other hand, had become colder, more distant. He no longer tried to talk to me, no longer looked at me the way he used to, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. One evening, as I sat on the veranda lost in thought, Chief Emeka joined me. "You've been quiet lately," he observed. "Is something wrong?" I forced a smile. "Just tired." He nodded, then took a sip of his drink. "Damian told me he's leaving soon, heading back to the States to handle some business." My heart clenched. I hadn't expected him to leave so soon. I should have felt relieved, but instead all I felt was an unbearable ache. That night I couldn't sleep. I found myself pacing in my room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. And then before I could stop myself, I was standing outside Damian's door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. This was a mistake, I should walk away. But just as I turned to leave, the door opened. Damian stood there, his expression unreadable. "I thought you'd come." I swallowed. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "Tomorrow." Silence stretched between us. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to undo, but it was too late. "I hope you find happiness, Noelle," he said softly, "even if it's not with me." Tears welled in my eyes as I turned and walked away, leaving a piece of my heart behind. The next morning, I watched from the window as Damian's car disappeared down the road. I told myself this was for the best, that I could move on and forget. But deep down, I knew the truth. I would never forget him.
And tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away.
Have you ever fallen into temptations similar to this? Did you overcome it? Share your experience in the comments section, and let's discuss. Please hit on the subscribe button if you like this story. Like the video and share. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.
Cause every time I wake up I feel like it's Monday. Something's going wrong with all the chemicals up in my brain. All of a sudden I don't look at anything the same way. Gotta build up of my thoughts sitting in an ashtray. I'm sorry that I'm so inconvenient, okay. Just let me be me and I'll stay out of your way. I can see the way you look at me, I'm such a disgrace. I never really asked to be brought into this place. You wanna love me? Well then baby I have a taste. All the highs and the lows, no you'll never be the same.